fish dropping out of a plane is something that happens several times a year over Utah's mountainous lakes. Thousands of fish were released from a plane.
In 1956, thousands of baby trout were dropped from a plane into remote, barren mountain lakes in Utah, waters that had never before held fish. What seems like an unlikely solution to a logistical nightmare sparked one of the longest-running and most remarkable wildlife programs in America, stretching across nearly 70 years and hundreds of lakes. But here's the twist. Those pristine lakes were never truly empty. What happened after the fish took flight reveals a surprising and unsettling tale about nature, science, and unintended consequences that only decades of research could unveil. A sky-high wildlife solution. In the summer of 1956, a small plane took flight over the rugged mountains of northern Utah, carrying an unusual cargo. Thousands of tiny trout fingerlings cradled in a water tank beneath its belly. The plane flew low, barely 100 feet above remote alpine lakes, and then a hatch opened, releasing a silver cascade of fish fluttering through the air before they gently touched down on water that had never known life like this before. What seems like an audacious and almost whimsical act was actually the birth of one of the longest-running and most remarkable wildlife operations in the American West. At that moment, biologists and anglers alike were facing a monumental problem. Hundreds of pristine mountain lakes were perfectly suited for fish, except that these waters were isolated by natural barriers, making them unreachable by conventional means. The rugged terrain, high elevations, and sheer remoteness meant that stocking these lakes with fish was all but impossible through traditional foot or vehicle transport. Utah wildlife officials needed a solution that could reach waters no human or animal could access efficiently. This aerial stocking method was revolutionary because it bypassed thousands of miles of treacherous trails and weeks of slow, exhausting pack animal journeys. Instead, fish were essentially parachuted into lakes from moving aircraft. For many, the idea seemed reckless or even cruel, dropping live animals from planes. But Utah's fishery managers believed it was the most practical answer to an impossible logistics puzzle. Over time, this approach would prove not only feasible, but surprisingly successful. By the end of the 1950s, Utah had quietly adopted and refined aerial stocking as a regular practice, sending planes every summer to rein fingerlings into these remote alpine waters. The state continually expanded the operation, stocking more lakes every year, creating a fishery that literally came from the sky. With each flight, the work became more sophisticated, evolving into a coordinated effort involving detailed counts, specialized aircraft, and technical care for the fish during their airborne delivery. Still, even if the whole spectacle, fish dropping out of the sky, looks wild and it gets your attention fast, the real curiosity starts underneath. Once those fish hit the water, what actually happened to them? And where did they go after that? Also, what about the lakes themselves, which had been doing fine for thousands of years without fish in the first place? The answers, according to researchers, are supposed to surprise both scientists and anglers, and they even push back on some long-held assumptions about these high mountain places. A lot of folks figured those lakes were basically empty bowls, just waiting around to be filled. But that story gets shaky not long after, because the plan isn't just adding more life, it's reshaping the whole balance. When trout were introduced, ecological dynamics shifted in a way nobody had really predicted. These waters weren't dead zones, they were systems already tuned over millennia without fish predators. Even now, nearly 70 years after that first flight, the practice keeps going across Utah's mountains. These days, modern planes deliver tens of thousands of fingerlings to hundreds of lakes each summer, continuing a kind of tradition that started out because the alternative was basically impossible. And yet, it carries a set of ecology's odd surprises. Aerial stocking has become a quiet footnote in wildlife management, quietly steering Utah's backcountry in directions most people never picture. What started as an inventive workaround for an unreachable issue turned into a real marvel of wildlife logistics, and honestly, a deep experiment in ecological change. But before getting into what all that did, it helps to understand what makes those lakes so unusual and why this method had to happen in the first place. Flyover fish drops are impressive, but they rest on a natural puzzle carved out by ice, rock, and geography. Puzzles that would rewrite how we see these mountain lakes forever. The fishless lakes, above the clouds. High above 9,000 feet sit thousands of alpine lakes scattered across mountain ranges like the Uinta Mountains of northeastern Utah, a concentration rivaled by few places in the United States. These lakes are not ordinary ponds, but glacially carved basins known as cirques, deep, rounded bowls gouged by massive ice sheets tens of thousands of years ago. When the ice retreated, these bowls filled with some of the purest, coldest fresh water on the continent. Yet nearly all of these lakes have one defining characteristic. They were naturally fishless. Unlike lower-altitude lakes connected by continuous waterways, the streams feeding these alpine bodies end abruptly at waterfalls or rapids far too turbulent for fish to overcome. A trout swimming upstream from the valleys below would be halted by cliffs or drops sometimes more than 40 feet high, insurmountable natural barriers that prevented any fish colonization for millennia. This fishless condition wasn't a deficiency or a sign of lifelessness. In fact, these lakes hosted vibrant and complex ecosystems that had evolved in isolation. Native amphibians, like frogs, salamanders, and toads, thrived without aquatic predators to threaten their eggs or larvae. Clouds of zooplankton and swarms of aquatic insects, mayflies, dragonflies, beetles, abounded, creating food webs that supported birds and other wildlife. The absence of fish shaped these ecosystems profoundly. Predation pressure was missing, allowing delicate species to flourish and develop unique adaptations over thousands of years. Each lake functioned as a quiet, balanced world, a rare example of truly fish-free aquatic ecosystems in North America. The stillness and purity of these waters were ecological treasures untouched by centuries of fish colonization. Those high mountain lakes felt like a snapshot of nature's design long before anyone got involved. Their fishless condition was basically a natural legacy that glaciers, waterfalls, and the rough terrain itself kept going. So this whole thing makes the neat little story harder to sell, the one where they were empty and just sitting there waiting for fish. Getting that idea right is key if you want to really understand what happens ecologically when fish are stocked from the air. The lakes were naturally isolated, which kept them pristine, but also made recreational fishing feel almost pointless. Anglers could not fish what they could not reach, and the lakes basically offered no fish to catch. That mismatch put pressure on fishery managers who really wanted to grow fishing opportunities in these faraway yet beautiful alpine waters. Then the question turned to how to bring fish into the picture without disturbing the delicate fishless systems already set in place. And there were thousands of these high lakes, many only reachable after days of hiking or horseback travel. The terrain was so severe and tangled that it influenced not just how life managed to thrive there, but also how people interacted with the place. To stock fish quickly enough, without lethal delays, required a new approach, something far beyond what one person, or even one animal alone, could realistically pull off. When Utah fishery managers understood how unique and fragile these fishless alpine lakes were, it set the stage for the really extraordinary techniques they would later pioneer. The whole point was simple: fishing would finally reach what seemed unreachable. After seeing how nature shaped these waters in the first place, it was time to ask how human ingenuity might try to reshape them again. Solving the problem of fishless lakes meant overcoming the mountain's natural defenses, and what came next would change both the lakes and the way fish got there. Early stocking methods before aviation. Before the daring flights of 1956, stocking those hard-to-reach mountain lakes was a brutal, painstaking labor of love and endurance. The only way to carry live fish into these remote waters was on the backs of pack animals traversing rocky trails that scaled thousands of feet. Hatchery workers would load heavy metal milk cans with water and trout fingerlings, then lash them securely to horses or mules, beginning journeys that could last for days or weeks. Once on the trail, every moment counted. Trout fingerlings require cool, oxygen-rich water to survive, so the stale water in the cans had to be changed frequently. At every suitable stream or streamside water source, workers had to stop and carefully pour out warmed water, fill the cans with fresh, cold water, and quickly secure them again. Each refill was critical to maintaining oxygen levels and preventing fish suffocation. The movement of the pack train was part of the survival strategy. The gentle jostling of cans as the animals walked helped aerate the water, circulating oxygen around the tiny fish and keeping them alive. But the effort was grueling, both for the men and the animals who endured rough terrain, steep climbs, and long days to deliver just a small number of fish to a handful of lakes. The logistical limits of this method were severe. There were more than 650 fishable lakes in the Uinta Mountains alone, and stocking each with enough fish to sustain populations was an almost impossible task. At the slow pace of pack trains, many lakes remained unreached, destined to stay fishless indefinitely. The sheer scale of the problem overwhelmed early efforts. This backbreaking work also limited the number of fish that could be dispersed in a season. The time-consuming nature of the journey meant hatchery staff could only service a small portion of the lakes before the season ended, falling far short of the growing demand from anglers eager for new fishing opportunities. The old method was not only exhausting, but costly and inefficient. It required enormous manpower, animal care, and precise timing to keep the fingerlings alive through harsh conditions. Despite the challenges, early fishery workers displayed remarkable dedication to expanding the state's recreational fishing resources. The slow reality of mule trains sparked a search for something faster, something more efficient, an idea that seemed impossible until aviation came into play. But even the idea of dropping fish from planes seemed like a mad gamble at first. How could fragile fish survive a fall from the sky? From the mountains to the skies, the journey to stock remote Utah lakes was about to take an unprecedented turn. The answer would merge natural physics with bold innovation, forever transforming fishery management in the American West. Understanding the wilderness lakes and the limits of human travel highlights just how extraordinary the aerial stocking breakthrough truly was. Science behind the drop. The daring idea of dropping tiny trout fingerlings from a plane hovered on the edge of impossibility. How could these fragile fish survive a fall from dozens of feet in the air? The answer lies in a fascinating blend of biology and physics.
It's raining fish in Utah. Live Science reports wildlife officials in Utah have been restocking remote lakes in the mountain by dropping fish from airplanes.
These fish are no bigger than 2 or 3 inches, with bodies so small and lightweight that air resistance dramatically slows their descent, much like a feather drifting gently to the ground. This natural slowdown prevents them from crashing into the water and dying on impact. But it's not just the fish's size that protects them during a drop. They fall not alone, but inside a cushion of water released simultaneously from the plane's tank. This spray acts like a natural parachute, enveloping the fish and keeping them moist and protected through the fall. Hatchery crews often describe the scene as fish fluttering through the air, rather than tumbling or crashing, highlighting the delicate balance between physics and biology that makes the method work. Behind this spectacle is a clever engineering system designed to ensure survival. The plane used is typically a single-engine Cessna 185 Skywagon fitted with a specially designed tank divided into 7 compartments. This setup allows pilots to stock 7 different lakes in one flight without landing to reload, releasing precise batches of fish at each location. Each compartment can hold up to 84 pounds of fish and hundreds of pounds of water, carefully balanced to maintain the fish's health during flight. Before departure, these fingerlings are taken off their feed to reduce waste and stress, then really carefully counted and weighed. It basically makes sure that each lake gets the right species and the right amount of fish needed for the best stocking. That kind of focus on the small stuff points to the state's commitment to balancing effective stocking with animal welfare, even when things get complicated. Even though dropping fish from aircraft sounds kind of odd, Utah wildlife officials knew they needed proof, not just a "we hope it works" style guess. The numbers mattered because watching the process wasn't enough for skeptics, and it also didn't really justify all the money and effort being put into it. So biologists moved fast. They set nets in the lakes within minutes after the fish landed. Then they counted survivors to get survival rates firsthand, without relying on hopeful assumptions. The outcome was kind of astonishing. More than 95% of the fish were found alive after their aerial descent, which was a survival rate way higher than anyone expected. That huge win turned aerial stocking from a desperate test into something dependable, a normal go-to method. It basically showed that with the right technique, Physics plus biology can work together to protect these tiny creatures even during a dramatic delivery. This wasn't only a technical success, it opened the door to populating thousands of lakes that were previously impossible to reach with conventional methods. It also carved out a new working area for fisheries biologists and anglers, and at the same time, it broadened fishery management and recreational fishing options in high alpine environments. That whole seemingly reckless notion, dropping fish from planes over rugged terrain, ended up being this kind of marvel of wildlife logistics and science. Still, while the method itself looked solid, the scale and overall impact of the practice were about to grow much bigger than anyone had figured. Even as aerial stocking became routine, technological advancements and expanding demand pushed the operation to impressive new heights. Scale and operation today. Today, Utah's aerial fish stocking program is far more than a strange sight in the sky. What began in 1956 as a creative way to reach remote mountain waters has become a large, carefully organized wildlife operation. Every summer, aircraft carry thousands of tiny fish into the high country, stocking hundreds of lakes that would be nearly impossible to reach by road, foot, or horseback. The scale is impressive. Utah has more than 300 high mountain lakes through this method, with some estimates placing the number closer to 450. These lakes are scattered across rugged ranges, from small 5-acre ponds tucked into alpine basins to broad bodies of water covering hundreds of acres. Many sit behind cliffs, forests, and miles of difficult terrain, making aerial delivery the most efficient option. The planes used today are still similar in spirit to the original Cessna 185 Skywagon, but the equipment has improved. Specialized tanks and release systems allow crews to carry huge numbers of fingerlings in a single flight. In some cases, one aircraft can transport up to 35,000 tiny fish at once. That means a pilot can stock several lakes before returning, saving time, fuel, and manpower. The flying itself requires precision and courage. Pilots often descend to just 50 to 150 feet above the water, moving through narrow valleys, over treetops, and near steep mountain walls. At exactly the right moment, the hatch opens, and the fish pour out in a shimmering stream. On busy days, crews may stock dozens of lakes, depending on weather, distance, and seasonal schedules. The fish species are chosen carefully. During summer, lakes may receive brook trout, rainbow trout, tiger trout, or splake. In the fall, managers may stock cutthroat trout, Utah's only native trout species, along with Arctic grayling. These choices are not random. Each lake is evaluated based on fishing goals, survival conditions, and ecological concerns. For people standing on the shore, the drop is often gentler than expected. Instead of a harsh crash, the fingerlings hit the surface like a soft rain. Hundreds of tiny fish scatter across the lake in a silver burst, disappearing almost instantly beneath the cold mountain water. The scene feels both dramatic and delicate. For decades, this operation remained mostly unknown outside wildlife agencies, hatchery workers, and local anglers. Then GoPro footage mounted beneath a stocking plane changed everything. The video showed streams of fish falling from the aircraft into Utah's wilderness, creating a surreal image that quickly went viral. Suddenly, a quiet backcountry practice became a national curiosity. But the story is bigger than viral footage. Aerial fish stocking represents human ingenuity, recreational demand, and the challenge of managing nature responsibly. It allows anglers to fish in remote alpine lakes, but it also raises important questions about the ecosystems being changed. The ripple effects of this airborne delivery approach would reach far beyond the immediate splashdown zones. Ecological transformations observed. Introducing trout into these high mountain lakes triggered a profound shift in the aquatic ecosystems, forever altering the balance that had existed for thousands of years. Within just a few years, lakes that had never supported fish populations began to host thriving, self-sustaining communities of trout. These newcomers found abundant food sources in the dense populations of aquatic insects and zooplankton that had evolved without predators, allowing trout numbers to grow rapidly and create new, vibrant fisheries. The presence of trout transformed these barren-looking alpine bowls into hotspots for anglers, drawing people willing to hike miles into rugged backcountry to cast a line. The once faint ripple of insect life below the surface turned into a buzzing web of predator-prey interactions centered around the introduced fish. Lakes that were originally silent and still now echoed with the splash of fishing lines and the movement of chasing trout, connecting people to wilderness in unprecedented ways. From a recreational perspective, this transformation was a stunning success. The aerial stocking program created a multi-million-dollar fishing economy in Utah, deepening the cultural and economic ties between residents and their mountain environment. Anglers could access fishing opportunities that had previously been unreachable, and the trickle-down benefits supported local businesses and tourism, weaving the fishery deeply into the state's identity. Ecologically, the introduction reshaped the base of the food web. Trout are visual hunters that preferentially consume large, conspicuous prey, including many native aquatic invertebrates. This predation pressure dramatically altered the abundance and diversity of plankton and insect populations, shifting the lakes from their original ecological balance. The nutrient cycles, energy flows, and species interactions shifted in ways that created a fundamentally new aquatic community. The altered lakes also impacted terrestrial wildlife that fed on aquatic insects and amphibians. Birds that made their living off emerging insect swarms found food sources fluctuating with the trout's presence. The once abundant insect populations at the water's edge became scarcer in many stocked lakes, indirectly affecting higher trophic levels as well. What had been a delicate ecosystem without fish was now a more dynamic, predator-driven system with different rhythms and challenges. This profound ecological upheaval kind of messed with what people thought was normal about the natural world. What looked like barren lakes turned out to be old, layered, and surprisingly intricate ecosystems, finely tuned by millions of years of evolution. And when trout were introduced, it wasn't just adding fish like that. It sort of swapped out whole pieces of the food web and shifted species composition, even beyond the water itself. These kinds of shifts show the unexpected fallout that can follow even well-meaning wildlife management, which is not always as benevolent as it sounds. Over decades, some stocked lakes kept strong fish populations, basically showing that trout were resilient and adaptable. But other lakes went through these cyclical surges and crashes, driven by things like weather, food availability, and the way ecological relationships connect together. The back and forth between the introduced trout and local organisms made these high mountain lakes feel more complicated than anyone would guess, and the results still stay hard to foresee or steer. Sure, the fishing opportunities from these changes get celebrated, but they also pull up rough questions about what ended up being lost and what got gained. When recreation succeeds for humans, it often does so while native species decline and overall ecosystem stability takes a hit. Those trade-offs are basically the center of the ongoing arguments about how to manage wilderness and wildlife, especially now in a changing world. So this whole ecological transformation isn't a simple win story. It's more like a story of balance and consequence, a reminder that nature rarely delivers predictable or purely positive outcomes once people start adjusting it. The footprint of these fish falls far and wide, dropped from the sky, and it makes you want to look closer at the costs hidden under the surface. Yet, the most striking consequences were still to come as scientists studied these lakes more closely, revealing a sobering picture of loss for native amphibians and insects. Unintended consequences on native species. As scientists studied stocked alpine lakes over longer periods, they began to uncover a troubling pattern. These mountain lakes had once been naturally fishless, giving native amphibians and aquatic insects a safe place to thrive without underwater predators. But when trout were introduced, that balance changed dramatically. Frogs, salamanders, and toads were among the first species affected. Their eggs, larvae, and young had evolved in waters where fish were never part of the food chain. Suddenly, they faced trout, fast, sharp-eyed predators that fed heavily on them. In some lakes, native amphibian populations dropped sharply. In others, they disappeared almost completely.
the worldwide amphibian decline. Amphibians include frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians. Many of these species live their larval lives in water. Found U.S. amphibians are vanishing from their habitat at an average of 3.7% each year.
The damage did not stay limited to one lake at a time. Researchers found that amphibian declines could spread across entire mountain basins. Because alpine lakes, wetlands, and streams are connected through movement, water flow, and wildlife patterns, the effects of stocked trout reached much farther than expected. What seemed like a simple act of adding fish had quietly reshaped whole ecosystems. Aquatic insects and zooplankton were also hit hard. Large zooplankton, which helped support the base of the food web, declined as trout consumed them. Mayflies, stoneflies, dragonflies, and other insects also suffered, changing the timing and abundance of insect life around the lakes. That mattered because birds, bats, and other animals depend on those insects for food. Similar consequences popped up across the American West. In California's Sierra Nevada, introduced trout were tied to the harsh drop in the mountain yellow-legged frog, a kind that used to be pretty ordinary in higher elevation lakes. In Idaho's Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, the protected places too saw amphibian declines that lined up with trout showing up there. And even far-off wilderness spots weren't really guarded from what fish introductions can do. These findings really messed with the old assumption that alpine lakes are empty, like blank spaces waiting for improvement. But no, they weren't empty. Those waters were older than people think, delicate systems shaped over thousands of years without fish. When people stocked them, it did open up new ways for anglers to fish, sure, but it also swapped one natural community for another, kinda like replacing the whole neighborhood. For wildlife managers, that turned into a tough dilemma. How do you balance recreational fishing while still safeguarding native life? So the agencies had to revisit stocking methods, pull fish from certain sensitive lakes, and place more weight on conservation and protection. The account of aerial trout stocking is not just about innovation either. It's also about the side effects you don't see at first. Basically, it nudges us to remember that even smart solutions can come with hidden costs once you change how nature holds things in balance. With this deeper understanding, wildlife managers began to adjust their practices, aiming to protect native species while still providing fishing opportunities to the public. Modern management and conservation. Over time, Utah's aerial fish stocking program changed from a bold wildlife experiment into a more careful balancing act. At first, the goal was simple: bring fish to remote mountain lakes so anglers could enjoy places that were once impossible to stock on foot or horseback. But as scientific understanding grew, wildlife managers began to see that these lakes were not empty. They were fragile ecosystems with native amphibians, insects, and plankton communities that had developed for thousands of years without fish predators. This awareness pushed agencies toward more conservation-minded management. Native trout, especially Utah's cutthroat trout, are now treated differently from non-native species. They are managed with stronger protections and stocked only where they fit naturally into the ecosystem. The focus is no longer just on creating fishing opportunities, but also on preserving native biodiversity. Another big change is the use of triploid trout. It's kind of a sterile situation. These fish can't reproduce, so they can't make lasting populations. Because of that, managers can back recreational fishing, while lowering the chance that non-native trout spread in a way that goes out of control and messes up whole alpine basins. It feels like a workable middle ground between human fun and ecological safeguards. Stocking choices have, honestly, gotten more selective too. Some lakes that used to be filled up with fish are now kinda left alone, so trout numbers can thin out or be taken away, and then native life gets a fair chance to rebound. In a few wilderness zones, fish removal efforts have supported the return of naturally fishless lakes, and it's helped restart parts of ecosystems that had been disrupted for decades. There's also more public transparency, which matters. Online stocking databases let people check which lakes get stocked, how many fish are released, and which species are used. That makes it easier for anglers and conservation folks to read the program instead of guessing. Today, aerial stocking is not just about dropping fish from planes anymore. It's more like managing the outcomes of that decision. So the legacy of Utah's airborne trout program has turned into a narrative about adapting, following science, and living with that hard balance between recreation and conservation. In just a few minutes, we uncovered why Utah began dropping tens of thousands of fish into remote mountain lakes, how those fish survived the fall, and the deep ecological impacts that followed. What started as a brilliant logistical solution grew into a complex interplay of wildlife management, ecosystem transformation, and scientific discovery. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please like and subscribe for more surprising tales from nature and history. And don't swim away just yet. The next video on your screen dives into another unexpected story you won't want to miss.